In this first project, we're going to be creating a conceptual image poster for an event. We're going to be using illustration to create that conceptual imagery. It's going to help us engage the viewer and really inspire them to come to that event. It's important to know that the posters we're creating are goal-oriented. There are some posters that are more like works of art, but in this case, we're really designing these posters to get someone to do something. In this case, get them to come to the event or have awareness of the event. So since we're working to become designers, we want to create projects that will be similar to what we're going to do as working designers. And if someone's paying a lot of money to print posters, you better believe that they are going to want something out of that. So it's not just about looking pretty, we really need to deliver on this goal. There's a couple things that you need to consider as you're designing your poster, and really when you're designing anything. One of those things is the target audience. Who are we trying to reach? Your target audience will be much different if you're designing for a punk rock concert compared to a conference for accountants. So just think about who your target audience is and how you can communicate with them in a way that's effective and authentic to them. Another important factor is the goal. What do we want to accomplish with this poster? In the case of this event, we probably want them to come to the event, or we want viewers to gain some kind of awareness of the event. But it's a good thing to keep in mind as you're designing. Is the messaging and the imagery in service of this goal? If not, it might not belong on the poster. A successful poster must do two things. It has to catch the attention of the viewer, and it has to deliver a message. If your poster is so dull that no one pays attention to it, then it doesn't do its job. If everyone just walks by it and doesn't notice it, well then you might as well have not printed it at all. On the other hand, if your poster looks amazing and everyone notices it, but it doesn't deliver any kind of message, then it also doesn't do its job. If people don't know after viewing the poster that they should go to this event, well then we didn't do our job as a designer of accomplishing the goal that we were set out to do. From a composition standpoint, posters should have a strong point of focus to draw the viewer in, and this poster by L. Lozitsky is a great example of that. This red wedge, which serves as a metaphor for Soviet power, is penetrating this Western bubble and is creating a very strong point of focus. This poster for General Dynamics by Eric Nietzsche is another great example. There's some different elements happening here, including an earth, a light bulb, and an atom, but the designer decided to stack those elements on top of each other instead of separating them. You can imagine that if the light bulb, atom, and earth were in separate corners of this design, it wouldn't have the same effect. But by layering them, it creates that really strong point of focus that is ultra engaging. A great way to get a strong point of focus is to include a ton of detail that really draws the viewer in, but then in a place where you break that detail, like the white spot in this jazz festival poster, your eye goes right to it, and in this case, right to that information that is going to help the poster accomplish its goal. Here's another example of overwhelming the eye with detail. Such a beautiful classic composition by Milton Glaser. And you can see that the contrast between the very detailed area and the clean area is what makes this poster so special. Another great compositional tool for creating depth and engagement is diagonals. And in this case, we have another Soviet example with this industrial machine that is just eating up this town. And it's those converging diagonals coming down this way that are creating that depth. If instead this monster came out of the side in a flat way, it wouldn't seem nearly as big and as intimidating. And the downward slope of the horizon line really seems like the town is just sliding into the mouth of this monster. This movie poster for Ocean's 11 is another really strong use of diagonals. All the diagonals in this poster are going at slightly different angles, which is creating a lot of asymmetrical balance. But overall, there's a lot of movement to this piece, and it's very engaging, especially because of this interaction between the silhouette and the number. The fact that the silhouette is coming over the number makes the number more than just a piece of text. It's actually become part of the scene. Here's another really strong use of diagonals in this movie poster for The Rocketeer. See how those diagonals are creating a sense of speed, really enhancing the power of this character. Another great technique for creating a strong composition is using repetition. In this case, we have a simple hand that is being repeated over and over. But if you look at the hand, it's actually a little different every time. That's one of the keys to repetition, is making sure it's not true repetition, but it's actually a repeated element that is being varied in some way. Here's another Soviet example that uses strong repetition. And you can see that in the place where the repetition breaks, in this case, that red silhouette, our eye goes right to it. And so it's a great way to create a strong point of focus. Create the repetition and then break it. And that breaking of the repetition will pull us right in. Typography can also be used to help create the illustration, which is a really strong way to bring in that hidden conceptual meaning. This poster from Paula Scher for Public Bikes is an amazing example, because the bicycle is clearly visible, but the word public is also very readable. So in this case, the messaging and the illustration are the same thing. This poster by Mario Fuentes is another great example of how typography can be conceptual. In this case, we have the word school combined with the illustration of a ladder, which serves as a metaphor for how school can elevate you. The yellow color from a school bus is used to evoke the feeling of school. And you can see that Mario Fuentes is also using diagonals to make the ladder seem longer than it is. If it weren't for those converging lines, the ladder would seem a little bit shorter. But since they are converging towards a point, the ladder feels very tall, going to lift us up really far. Simplification is a great technique for creating something conceptual, and this is a great example. This is a Japanese geisha figure, and even though it's just simple geometry, we're really good at decoding these and figuring out what they are. And that's one of the reasons that it's so engaging, is that it becomes a little bit of a puzzle for us, and when we solve it, we feel rewarded. Here's another example that uses the famous architecture of the Guggenheim and reduces it to this really simple form. It's a really good way of advertising the Guggenheim in a way that is simple, but again, rewards the viewer for being able to figure out what's going on. Jason Munn is a master of this simple style, and he's a great source of inspiration for this assignment because he's worked on a lot of music posters. This one for the Postal Service is an amazing example. The envelope is opening up, and the inside is creating a set of lips that is kissing this stamp. So we have a combination of the content of the Postal Service music mixed with a reference to their name with the postal-related imagery. This is a great series by Albert Exergian that is simplifying pop culture references down to their very basic forms. And I love this because it's a great way to engage a specific target audience. People that are fans of The Simpsons will be able to recognize that this is an illustration of Homer's head. But if you don't know The Simpsons, you wouldn't get it. And that's okay because this poster is really reaching out to fans. And so it's a really good way to engage a specific target audience and again, create that puzzle that when you decode it, you feel included and you feel rewarded. As you create your illustration, keep in mind that you don't have to stick to what's realistic. This is one of the powers of illustration, is that you can do things that normally wouldn't happen in real life. This is an example by Ryan Duggan, and I've actually modified this to make the character much smaller. Here's the original, and you can see it's much more engaging because the character is way out of proportion to the building, which is starting to inject a story into this illustration. And although this one is not wrong, the illustration style is very technical and I really like it, this is a much more conceptual approach. Here's another great example of manipulating scale. In this case, we're zooming in on something to see it from an angle that we're not used to. And it makes something like this corn much more engaging. Although the corn is drawn in a pretty normal way, the fact that we're zooming in on it and focusing on this action of eating it is making it really interesting. This is also a great example of simplification. Before you start creating your poster, it's good to take a second to gather some inspiration. And I've pulled up some of my favorite pieces of inspiration, including Pinterest, where I've just searched for simple poster. See, there's a lot of interesting stuff here, a lot of stuff that is relevant to this assignment. So definitely make sure you take advantage of these resources. Another thing that you can search for is Jason Munn. He's probably my favorite single source of inspiration for this assignment because he does a lot of music events, and he often works in this conceptual style where he combines two images together. You can also take a look at typographicposters.com, which is a great source for type-based posters, but there's also some really good illustrative stuff in here as well. And the way I like to use this site is just by clicking on something that catches my eye. And then underneath that, you get a bunch of related stuff. And so you can just kind of go down this spiral of inspiration and find things that are really interesting. And then lastly, we have posterposter.org. And I like to go to the masters section, which has a bunch of masters of poster design. So you can click on whichever one catches your eye, and then hear a little bit about their philosophy and then see some of their work as well. So it's a great way to get inspired.